this computer. Okay. Last week, oh, there's Laura. Good.
Hi.
Hello. Last week we did the transaction screen, and the transaction screen itself is basically done. I think in a couple of weeks we may add one little button to the bottom of it, but otherwise the transaction screen is done. This week we're going to study Spring Data, and Spring Data, instead of that singleton where we kept the transactions in an array list, we're going to actually use a database. So I guess I better open up the lesson. Seems like I did that earlier somewhere. I only got 15 screens open. Well, I can get to it from here. By the way, everyone, I'm teaching in the second half of next semester, starting right after spring break. I'll be teaching a class in making Java Groovy. Groovy is another programming language that runs on the JVM, and I think you will find Groovy very interesting, and how you can use it along with your Java programs, and there's some things that you can do with Groovy that are much easier to do in Groovy than they are in Java. And it's only 8 weeks. It's only a 1-hour course, so it won't be as nearly as grueling as this one. But I've offered it before, but I didn't have a bunch of Java students at that time, so it hasn't made before, and I hope to that it makes this time. In fact, I've already in discussions with the author of the book, who's a good friend of mine, and offered to upgrade his book for him. It's about 4 or 5 years old, and it needs to be updated, so I will be updating it as I prepare for the course. So look for that on the schedule. It's online. It's a 1 credit hour, and will be usually when I teach a 1-hour class, I throw lessons out there for you to do, but you know, it's not like I'm going to require you to make a certain grade to pass. If you work with me and work with the assignments a little bit, then you know, you'll pass. You'll make an A. It's not a like a required course, so I'm not nearly as strict with grades, etc., as I am with these 4-hour classes. So anyway, the commercial is over. I hope you will all consider taking it. You'll get to listen to me for 8 more weeks. But that's the second half of next semester, so it's after spring break. Okay. As I said, this week we're dealing with lesson 12. So I'm going to go out here and check out from Get. And, oh great, I got to figure out where my repo is. There. And I want to pick the lesson 11 branch, and I want to clone, and I want to copy that and bring it over here and drop it in here. And I won't put it in Josh's folder. I wouldn't do that to him. And since I already have a transaction app and I don't want to mess it up, I'm going to put transaction app 12 on it, just so we create a whole new project. And that'll connect, and that will clone. And Phoenix, Arizona. I don't want to talk to anybody in Phoenix, Arizona. Okay. Import, create directories. Well, I think we'll do this. And that says 10, so okay. Well, that's interesting. It's switched screens on me. So let me drag it over here and maximize it. And find my instructions again. Okay. So I want to make sure we're getting the right lesson. So from branches, I want to go down here and check this out. And we'll call it 12. Will let me do that? Apparently it will. And okay. So let's see what we got here. Source has I knew just as soon as I got that open, it was going to come back and close it on me. Well, they actually left a message. Okay. Usually they just hang up because it's a robocall. Okay, there's our transaction controller. There's our transaction on our selected day. There's that singleton transaction. And there's our transaction services and the trans app. So number 2 says to go to the resources and open, and we're going to change this to say lesson 12 and this to say data. And then I'm going to the README file, wherever it is, must be, let's close this bottom stuff. I don't need it right now. The README file, change this to say dash lesson 12 dash spring data. All right, so we can close those two. I'll leave this open because the next thing I'm going to do is add all of this stuff to the application properties. I don't know why that comment is there. I'm going to leave it off for the moment. And now this is going to specify the path for error. And don't tell me, I don't know what all this is. This has to do with JPA, which is Java Persistence. And it's going to generate the data definition language, and the we're going to use something called Hibernate, but you don't actually deal with it, and so it's DDL auto is none, and then we're going to initialize an embedded data source, which is H2 memory database, and this shows up in red, but that's because we haven't brought it in yet. And there's user password and the console. This allows us to look at the records in the database from the web app. And so now I can save that, and we can close it for the moment and open the build Gradle file. And we're going to scroll down here, and I will need to add 3 lines to it. Whoops. Well, come on. It doesn't want to copy very well. In fact, we already got Lombok there. Well, we'll just copy, and we'll come over here, and I will highlight the Lombok line, and so now we're going to bring in the starter data JPA, and Lombok went from a compile only to implementation, doesn't matter. And for runtime only, here's the database, the H2 database. And what this allows us to do is create a database on the fly. It'll act very much like the singleton. It'll be in memory, so when you restart, the data is eliminated. So you start over, but it's very easy to work with for simple applications, and you actually can change that application property right here, this mem, and actually persist the database to the disk. But H2 is not really used for a database. You would probably use something else such as MySQL or Postgres or what is it, Maria, or Apache or Oracle or whatever. It's primarily used just for testing and as a memory database. Although I did read an article lately where a person had an application with 2 data sources, a Spring application with 2 data sources, and they were using H2 to store things in memory for very quick access, but they were also persisting it to some other database, Oracle or something. But in order to have the data in memory and be able to access it quickly, they were using this as a buffer, so to speak. So close that, and this has already brought our libraries in. Whoa, an ID error, huh? Don't like to see those. But if we quickly look down here, here's the JAVAX persistence and transaction and validation. Here's the H2 database right here, and offhand I don't see anything else, but that JPA is what brings in this this JAVAX stuff, and there's the Hibernate stuff that the JPA brings in for you, and there's the starter. There's JDBC, that's and data JPA, That's all just came in, and here's some more. There's a JPA 2.1.2 release. So we got all this stuff already in there as a result of having put these statements in the Gradle build file. Close this puppy right there. Okay. So now the next thing in the transaction controller, remove the import for the singleton transaction. So open up this and go up here to the and we're going to get rid of this line right here. Boom. And that will give that an error. Let's see. And it says I want to add the following imports. So bring those over here and we'll drop them. Probably be a good place right there. So we bring in the local data time formatter, the format style, and the JobX persistence. And of course, we haven't used any of that yet, so there you are showing as not used. And now I'm going to change the load transaction page method. I can get this highlighted and we're going to copy that and come over here. And here's the load transaction page. And rather than replace all of that, let's see, public string load transaction page model. And okay, I will. We'll replace all of this with this code. This is going to create a new transaction and store it in the model as a attribute transaction form. We're going to get the days again, stored in the model as the days variable. And then here's the transaction service where we get all transaction and store that in a variable, an iterable variable called transactions. And then we return transaction, which is the name of the page that we want to render. Okay, and change the create transaction, which is down here, and come on. So we're going to go, obviously we need to replace this line right here. Well, oh, you're supposed to change that line to this stuff down here, so I can get rid of this stuff. Okay, what Ah, gee. So if it has errors, it goes through this situation. To go back out to the transaction screen, we put that in there. Remember last time we put in the not nulls in the transaction class. So if you hit the submit button on the transaction screen, it comes back with these errors if all those fields are empty. But so if it does not have any errors, it's going to get the current time. It's going to format that and set the time in the transaction. And it's going to then call the transaction service to create the transaction. And it's going to redirect you to the transaction screen, which is what sends the transaction screen out again with the left side empty, and the right side will have the new transaction added to it. Okay. And then step 10, I think we may be through with transaction. Step 10, in the transaction class, we need to put a little bit more in here. In addition to data, we want to specify that it's an entity. That's the JAVAX persistence. This is a database entity, so we have to tag it as such. And we also have to tell it what the database table is. So @ table oh. And in here we're going to say name equal transaction. So that will be the name of our database table. We want to add a little bit to our key field. We want to annotate it as @ID, and we're going to say @generation or generated value, and in parentheses we're going to say strategy is equal to generation dot type, no, generation type, type dot identity, and that will cause it to bump this this ID up as we save each record to the database. And we also want to put an annotation on big decimal that says @column, and in parentheses we say precision. Did I spell that right? Nope, I didn't. CISION equals 7, and scale equals 2. So that tells the database that this is a 7-digit number and it has 2 decimal places. And now, all right, Alexa, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go here and get rid of this class. Goodbye. And delete it. All right, so now we're going to I'm going to save this guy. And we're going over to the repository and right click and create a new Java class. And we're going to call this transaction repository. Repository. And okay. And we're going to add that to Git. And this is a fairly short, actually this is an interface. And so I want to replace both of those lines with this. So we annotate it as a repository, and we say this interface extends CRUD repository with the entity being transaction, and the key is a long value. And CRUD repository is in Spring, and that is CRUD is create, read, update, and delete. And so this provides all of that, those routines for you within that interface. And so next, I'm going to, come on, change the transaction service class here, and I'm going to have 2 lines in it. If I can ever get hold of these 2 lines. Copy. And, well, is it the same 2 lines? And get all, oh, the difference is instead of a list, it's going to be an iterable. Okay. So instead of creating an array list, we're going to create, it's going to return something that is of a superclass of iterable. And then we're going to go to transaction service impl. And in here, we're going to put in all of this code. All the way to the top. And copy. And we're going to just get rid of this whole kit and caboodle and replace it with this. Interesting. You should know what a string is. Okay, this tests the Boolean variable, and if it's true, it's going to return failed. Otherwise, it's going to return successful. And those are definitely strings. So why is it not like this string right here? Clashes with the create transaction in the transaction service attempting to use incompatible. Okay. Did I not? Oh yeah. I was supposed to change this type here too. Change the list to iterable and change the result of the create transaction to a string. And so now that string is okay. So basically these are the two methods that we are overriding in CRUD repository. And the create transaction is going to call the save method in transaction repository with that transaction object that we create. And if everything's fine, then he returns a successful. And if not, he returns failed. And the other one is just to get all transactions. So it does calls the find all method in the CRUD repository and returns it, which returns an iterable. So there are a whole bunch of methods in CRUD repository, but these are the only two that we have to do any changing, because we're not going to be doing any updates. We're not going to be doing any deletes or anything like that. We're just going to be creating new transactions and retrieving all the transactions. Okay. Any questions so far? All right. So let's close these things down. And now in the resources folder, that's what I thought, we want to create two files, two SQL files actually. And one is going to be called data.sql, and we want to add that to the repository. And the other one is schema schema.sql, and add it to the repository. And we're going to add 4 records to the database to kind of prime the pump, so to speak. And so in data SQL, here are the 4 SQL statements. Insert into transaction with the ID 1234, and day is Tuesday, Wednesday, Monday, and Sunday, and the times that they were created, and a bogus description, and an amount, and then the type of whether it's revenue or expense. This is something that Spring looks for when it's coming up, and will create your database and put some data in it, because we're going to come over here to schema and put this out there. Create table transaction. The ID is an integer, not null, auto increment, and that is nothing but the heading from the document. And the day is a varchar 100, not null. Time is varchar 100, not null. Description varchar 100, not null. The amount is a decimal 50,2, much bigger than it has to be. And type varchar 7 is the type, revenue or expense, and the primary key of this table is ID. So now it's when in Spring starts up, it's going to create these 2 guys for us. Yeah, they got saved. Okay. Now, I'm going to finish this tonight, so that everything's on the recording. That just means if you don't want to come Saturday, you don't have to come Saturday. In fact, I may just call Saturday off. Leave it open for anybody that has questions or issues. Okay, replace the transaction aptitude test with the following. Okay, and what am I going to change? Well, let's just grab the whole thing, if I can. Copy that and come over here and always for the import. All right, and here's this test is going to run with the Spring Runner and the Spring Boot test. We're going to set the web environment up, and it's going to use a random port number rather than 8080. And this is a part of Lombok, and that's going to set up a log capability, which yeah, I do log it down there. So we auto wire in the transaction repository. Here's our context loads test that Spring created for us. And then I've created a couple of simple tests. The first one is just going to call the count method, which is one of those that we didn't create. It's in CRUD repository for us to use. And so it's going to return you a count of the records in the database. And it's going to say it expects that number to be a long value of 4 because we load 4 records into the database. And the other test is we're going to do a find all and return it into a variable it, which is an iterable with type transaction. And then it's going to, for each transaction in that iterable, it's going to log it to the log. And the other thing that's okay, one thing that this doesn't point out, since we're only counting records here and we're only retrieving records and dumping them, we're not really testing the add capability, and so therefore we don't have to use transactional on your test. If you're going to modify the database or what have you, you would put a annotation at the top up here at transaction, I think it is, or transactional. And what that will do is each one of these tests then would run independently, so that if a test added a record to the database and then counted to see if there were 5 of them, then when that test was over, it would reset the database back to the original 4 records before it ran another test. It's like if you've studied database, it actually rolls back that transaction. But since we're not adding any records in the test here, etc., it doesn't need that. We very easily could, but I'm not. I didn't put that in the instructions, so I'm not going to do it. So that's all the code, folks. Deep. That's all, folks. And we're going to run all tests and see if this will come up. Oh, one of the tests failed. Okay. It expected to find full records and got 0 because it, yeah. And this one didn't find any records, so it didn't print them out. So we're going to have to go in and figure out what the problem is. Okay. Maybe I need to be up. There we go. Okay. Did not detect the default resource location. Could not detect default resource. Annotation declaration. Identify. Found Spring Boot configuration. Loaded default test execution. Initializing the Spring embedded application context. It initialized Tomcat. It finished the Spring data repository scanning. There's Hibernate. Initializing the JPA Manager factory for persistence. Okay, yeah, we got it. Oh, those are those darn warnings. And so it's using Spring JP Open in View. Is enabled by default. Okay. I think the problem has to do with, obviously, that data and schema things did not run. There they are. And they're in the resource folder.
Data was named DATS.
Oh. That's the reason.
As a Saints fan, I appreciate that pun.
Okay. Thank you for seeing that. Okay, so let's run all those tests again. And that makes sense because the count worked, so there had to be a database. It just didn't have any records in it. And this time they all passed. And if we look at the transaction DB all, here is the log record right here. Transaction ID 1 and transaction ID 2 and 3 and 4. And if you remember when I wrote that test, I intentionally put the \n first because this line would have been put on the end of this line, and then you got to scroll to the right to see that data. And so I've seen this before, so I put in a new line which forces the data to come out on a line by itself, so it's a little easier to read. And the dB count was obviously 4 because it passed and didn't put out a expected difference here. So the test now run. Thank you. And now we'll come up here and let's do this. Let's go over here to Gradle and let's open up task and application and do a boot run. Just another way to execute this this Spring Boot application. You can also right click on trans application class, which is the one that has the main method in it, but the boot run do the same thing. Basically, the boot run bypasses that class transaction application and just jumps right into Spring and starts doing things. And as soon as the cat stops running back and forth, can you see the bottom of the screen? Can you see the little cat running back and forth down there?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Sometimes the zoom cuts off parts of the screen. Okay, the build was successful. Okay, well, come on. Oh, I got 2 of them running, don't I? How did I do that? I got one here, and he's doing something. And this second one over here is most likely going to fail because the, well, come on, cursor. Respond. Where are you? Come on. Right down here. And X this one. Come on. X. Yes, I want to 8. So it only have one running. Okay. And all right, why is the cat still running? Oh, I didn't want to do rest. And see, here's our familiar page, only now it says lesson 12 spring data. And we start. And it's the same transaction screen. There's our 4 records that were loaded in the DATS.SQL. And we can select a day, Tuesday, and amount 100, and payday, and submit. And then we'll put in expense and select Wednesday and put in $50, and the description is rent, and submit. So this is basically, this page functions exactly like it did. The difference is that we actually put things into a database, which I'm going to show you in just a moment. But here's what I was talking about, the error handling. If you hit submit without filling in the fields, it gives you these little errors down here. Description field is empty, the type field is empty, the amount field is empty, and the day field is empty. So that's the not know testing, which is very basic. I mean, if you were writing an application, you would probably test the amount, you'd verify that the day was good, and so forth. But this was just some very basic handling. Now, one other thing I want to show you is if you come up here and you say H2 console, that brings this up. And it says that the driver is this. It's an embedded H2 database, and here's the URL. And we can test the connection, but it's going to successful. So we say connect to this database, and it brings you up this nice little screen. Here's our transaction table right here. And if we click on that, it puts this basic SQL statement over here to select answers from transaction, and you hit run, and there's your 6 records that are in the database. So is that not cool?
Pretty neat.
That's kind of cool.
That was the H2 console that I turned on in the, I guess it was the application properties. So, any questions? And, whoa, okay. This was the error template, might not. Ooh, that's interesting. Oh, that's the error page. Interesting. We didn't put an error page in. So what? It's right. The error page does not exist. Okay, so I'm going to shut the application down, and the next one says click on the version control window. Do I have a version control window? No, I don't. So if I come over to view, tool windows, view, come on, tool windows, and version control. And so here's all of our change files, application properties, build Gradle, data SQL. It's even spelled right. Gradle W, README, schema. The singleton was actually being deleted. There's the transaction Java, the transaction controller, the repository, the service, and the service info, and the tests. So now we click on the check mark, and we put a message in here. What did I say? Commit changes to, commit changes for lesson 12. And so we commit. Oh, I didn't uncheck these guys to the right, did I? Just go ahead and that came as a result of these things, I think. No, but we'll look at them just. Unable to resolve table. Try that. That's interesting. See, definitely need to unclick those things at the right. How do I get back? Okay. I guess I got the version control windows way over here to the left, underneath the. So click the green arrow again, and this time I'll be sure and get rid of the perform code analysis and check that. Make sure that everything is checked over here. Ooh. Oh. We want to include those too. And so we commit that. And those have now been committed to our local repository. And the next step is to click on VCS and get and push. And I'm not going to actually do this because the lesson 12 is already out there. But what you do is you click on this lesson 11. That's where you checked it out from. And you change this to say lesson 12. So this is saying take your local lesson 12 branch and push it to the lesson 12 branch on the remote repository. And if I push this, it would push it up to GitHub and would probably mess up what I have up there. So, any questions about what we did here?
Not yet.
Well, that's all. If you spell your DATs right, it should work pretty well. But everybody see what we did this week? Instead of having that singleton here to hold the transactions in an array list, we actually used Spring Data, and that transactions repository right there actually saved them to the database. Okay.
Okay.
Last week was long because we were doing the screen and everything. This week is a lot easier, I think. Next week, it's going to be. It was difficult for me. I don't know how difficult it'll be for you. I don't think it will because I lay it all out like this. But next week we'll be doing putting security into this applications. We'll be adding a login and a log out and a register screen, and then protect the transaction screen to only be used by people that are logged in. And so that's what we'll be doing next week. And as I said, it was difficult for me to get it all together, but it shouldn't be too difficult for you. And then the following week will be, I think, a real easy week because we'll be creating and consuming RESTful data services. And when I got into it, in fact, after I had done the assignment. I started reviewing the two chapters in Spring in Action on RESTful services, and I hate to say I learned something, I relearned something or reinforced something that I had forgotten, and I went back and actually simplified the code, dropped a whole method out of the REST controller that wasn't needed because of a feature of Spring Data, and so we'll talk about that 2 weeks from tonight. And I'm still working on I've got the application. Actually, I can show you the application. Whoops, that wasn't very good. Let me okay, this is down now. So let's see. What is it? I got to find my my URL. It's not on that panel. It's not on that panel. Well, maybe I don't have it open, darn it. And let's drag this over here. And is it down here? No. All right, let's see if I can make it. Apply. I don't think that's right. Is it wfly? No, that's my repository. Maybe it's bfly. I don't see that either. .heroku.com. Whoops. / well, phooey. Let me see if I can get it to come up on one of my other screens here, because I don't remember the Heroku. Yeah, there it was. There it was. Well, yeah. Oh, I didn't. All right. Well, that's the latest activity. All right. Okay. Bill fly dot Heroku. Ah, Heroku apps.com and that. Nope. Maybe it's no S. Good. Oh, there's nothing here. Interesting. Heroku apps. Maybe this is supposed to be .net. It actually works, folks, if I get the right. Okay, it's connecting. Keep in mind that this application doesn't run all the time, so you don't get charged for it. And so when you execute it, it takes a moment for it to find a place to run it. Ooh, took too long to respond. Well, pretty sure I got the right URL now. Let's see, with Heroku, you don't have your own unique domain name. Your Heroku ID is the subnet to or subdomain of herokuapp.net, and then this is the name of the application. When you ask it to create an application for you, it'll give you a funny looking name. I can tell you what the other applications I have out there, they have some of their Hidden Reef 68376, Polar Dusk -96182, Damp Plateau 74777. It gives you a strange name, but well, this is the one I set up, and ordinarily it will run. Maybe I just don't have the first part of this exactly right. It says it's asleep. I believe that. Wake it up. Open app. Oh, that's a different URL. If this comes up on my other screen, I'll move it over and show you. Waiting, waiting, waiting. There we go. I knew I should have some of them in the buffer there, but it's still taking a long time for it to wake this app up. This is what you get for a free service. There. So here's lesson 14. Looks kind of like before, except we got a register, so you can register a person. Here's the RESTful web service that we're going to use. It's called the Chuck Norris joke database, and you can plug in any name you want. So I ask it to give me, instead of Chuck Norris, Craig Walls, and also make sure you specify type equal nerdy so that it returns mostly clean jokes. But no one has ever programmed with Craig Walls and lived to tell about it. Ha 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 ha. Remember, this is about Chuck Norris, so. Craig Walls is the only human being to display the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. You can never know both exactly where and how quickly he will roundhouse kick you in the face. Yeah.
I get that funny.
And can delete the recycling bin. Works on my machine, always holds true for Craig Walls. And does infinite loops in 4 seconds. So anyway, if I take the joke off and get back to the main screen, I can show you. You hit start, and it's what it has done is it now the start takes you to the transaction screen. But when I put in security, I protected the transaction screen, so it shows throws up a login screen, and I loaded the user database with this username down here, Bill, and password RD123. Great password, but it's simple. And then that's my password manager or something, and that is my password manager. I don't want to save that. And hit submit again. And now this will show me the transaction screen. Look familiar? The only difference is that we have a download button now. And this download button is a web service that you're providing. The other was one that we consumed. When I hit the download button, here's all of the transactions in the database. Those 4 transactions plus some other stuff. And this is the part of it that I wrote the method in the REST controller and then realized I didn't have to write any code at all. And so this is the other way of dumping the transactions out to the screen, and this is JSON. See, it says these are embedded, and each of them is a transaction, and there's the time, the day, the description, the amount, and the type, and then here's a self link, and it says transactions, and that one out there is the ID. So if you copy this up here, it would put out just one. And then here's the second one, and the third one, and the fourth one, and then it. This is the URL of the whole thing right here. And I don't know what that last thing does, but I set up a method which responded to this URL of transactions. Actually, I had it download /download, And then I found out that by adding one dependency to the bill.gradle, pull in one more Spring Data component, that it would provide me a all of this, and as a plural of the repository. Transaction is the repository, and with an S, it does this dump. And I definitely did not code this, but if I put in users, this dumps out the 2 users in the database, or 1 user in the database. There's Bill and the encrypted password, and he's user number 1. And those are those extra stuff at the bottom. And then there's another table, roles, and there's an admin role, and he is applied to user ID 1, which is Bill, and a role of user, which is applied to user ID 1. So the Bill user ID has both an admin and a user role, and which I eliminated the difference in that. And basically, to get to the transaction screen, you have to have one of those 2 roles in your registration. And by the way, I will show you, if I come here and click log out, it will log Bill out and send you back to the home screen. But if I want to register, it throws up a register screen. And we'll put Alicia and password of PW1.
Hey.
And confirm the password PW1 and register. And now I can type in Alicia and PW1 and submit that. And now that will bring you to the transaction screen, because Alicia is a registered user. Come on. Password manager, stop. Okay. Now if I go back up here and do that users thing again, it shows Bill and Alicia. And so this is what your lesson 14 will look like. And by the way, if I do roles, it shows that user ID 1 has an admin and a user role, and user ID has a user role. Sorry, Alicia. So anyhow, and this is running out on Heroku. This is not running on my local system. So that's just a preview of what you're going to be doing the rest of the class. And again, this getting it to run Heroku will be an optional exercise, but I figure you'll want to play with it a little bit, whether you do it during finals week or after the course is over, what have you. We'll have the instructions to do so. So, any questions about lesson 12 or anything? All right, so I'll put the word out. Saturday mornings will be optional. I've already everything's on the tape here and in the instructions, and I will be here, as the comedian says, I'm here all week. Will not be available Thursday afternoon during the Cowboy game.
Aww.
And I won't be available Wednesday afternoon or evening because I got to go pick up my wife at the airport. But other than that, I will be here most of the week and available to help you. And I will show up on the teleconference on Saturday morning for anybody that needs help.
Okay.
Last chance. Questions?
I do have a question, but it's on lesson 11.
All right. And somebody else had wanted some help. Who was that?